Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this open knowledge session. I would like to introduce you to a study entitled The Role of Cultural and Creative Enterprises in the Post-COVID-19 Era, which has been developed by Confindustria. Confindustria is the Italian federation that represents the business service sectors in Italy. The main question of this study is how can the cultural sector drive post-COVID urban regeneration processes? We will have Angela D'Arrigo among the audience from Confcultura, so representing the Italian companies specialized in museum and cultural heritage management, that will be able to answer your questions in the chat. The study is coming from an overview of the emerging trends coming from a qualitative survey that was conducted in October 2020 and actually is coming perfectly on time if we consider that on Wednesday, the European Parliament's Committee on Culture and Education just adopted a resolution for helping the cultural heritage sector in this COVID crisis. But now let's enjoy the video.
Good morning to all the participants in the meeting and to the distinguished audience. I'm Patrizia Asproni, President at Confcultura and CSIT consultant for ROCK project. As part of the dissemination and communication plan of the ROCK project Work Package 5, CSIT had a task of implementing an action of Task 5.3, Networking and Knowledge Transfer, with the organization of an event as a policy marketplace within the final project event. The event was scheduled for last May in Bologna, but we know how it went. As the dreaded coronavirus rips across the globe, city after city has locked down, transforming urban business centers, suburban malls and other public spaces in ghost towns. These sudden and total closures have had a devastating impact on companies working on the production of goods and services for cultural heritage, and also on the timing to realize and complete some processes of urban regeneration. Coronavirus is making some people rethink where they want to live. Not only fewer crowds, more space and better quality of life, but also the rise in working remotely, in living away from urban centers that up until now have been points of convergence and attraction for sociality and innovation. The long-standing role played by arts and cultural organizations in building social capital will become even more indispensable as we start to accommodate the needs of a population at high risk for social distance and isolation. We need to get out of the darkness, and art and culture are giving us warning signals, fostering community partnerships. They will shore up failing civic structure when health and social service organizations will begin to struggle facing dwindling government funding. Regeneration could become the password for the future. Regeneration is a magnificent word full of promises. Change and redemption, rebirth, redemption and renewal, awakening. Since it gives us a different and helpful perspective, it would be a good thing if we all manage to appropriate it and to insert it with all its fertile meanings into our mental landscape and perhaps to enrich our cultural talents. It is, in short, the virtuous version of gentrification. It goes beyond the concept of sustainability. A difficult balance must be achieved between institutional and spontaneous interventions, between innovation and memory. And fundamental in this case too, we must work in agreement with the communities. Communities are made of the public component, with the role of territorial administration and of the individuals who live there, increasingly less passive recipient of regeneration policies and strategies. Territorial policies, in fact, never concern only with territories, but also and primarily the people who live there. Communities are also the sum of the cultural, social and economic actors active in a territory. So, it's time again for dialogue and discussions, for debates and discourses to sow seeds of a new knowledge for a new system of sustainability. Cultural and creative companies can and must have a voice in this debate, taking advantage of opportunities such as the ROCK project to bring their issues in front of the UE decision makers. Thus, in the impossibility of realizing a business matching based on meeting and exchange, we have tried to give an equal voice to companies, even those which are not active in the ROCK project, but which deal with urban regeneration, capturing some aspects that Dr. Stefano Cozzolino will now illustrate.
With this research, we want to understand and explore the perspective of those non-institutional private actors that are involved in the provision of cultural facilities and the promotion of urban heritage in general. We want to understand the challenges that those actors had to face as a consequence of a global pandemic, but also if these big changes have pushed the cultural sectors towards new innovation. Of great interest is also the investigation of possible institutional barriers that need to be overcome in order to facilitate new economic investment and enable the reuse of urban heritage. The main question that will guide the development of this research is whether and how the cultural sector can drive post-COVID urban regeneration processes. In order to do so, we briefly provide a thematic overview of contemporary trends concerning the issue of adaptive reuse heritage context and the current impact of COVID-19. Then, we present the emerging trends of a qualitative survey conducted to 7 selected relevant actors of the field of cultural activities. And finally, we will propose certain implications and possibilities to better integrate the cultural sectors in urban heritage regeneration processes. Now we start with a thematic overview. First, we discuss the issue of adaptive reuse strategies in heritage context, and then we move to the impact of COVID-19. In the last years, an apparently more sensitive understanding of urban regeneration processes that prioritize the role of culture has emerged. This shift, which is now seen as a key aspect in urban regeneration debates, had contributed to an innovative match between urban heritage and the creative sector. The main idea is that the contribution of urban heritage may be stronger if it welcomes experimental reinterpretation and uses capable of strengthening local communities and generate new values and interest in the territory. Obviously, the match between heritage and creativity generate what we call or define adaptive reuse strategy of historically relevant elements, for instance, buildings or places. But also, it opens a window of opportunities toward new design approaches and undiscovered social economic potential. Observe that in territorial contexts with a vast presence of heritage, As it is the case of Italian territory, for instance, this approach is probably one of the most effective in trying how to avoid certain negative phenomena, such as underutilization or the complete abandonment of historical relevant settlements. In summary, adaptive reuse strategies are effectively one of the possible approaches to boost culturally led urban regeneration processes. They can be seen as an act of giving a new use to an obsolete or underused container or box, aiming at exploiting the full potential of urban heritage while preserving its existing identity and value. This approach is not only suitable for urban cultural heritage promotion, use to an obsolete or underused container or box, aiming at exploiting the full potential of urban heritage while preserving its existing identity and value. This approach is not only suitable for urban cultural heritage promotion, but more importantly, it is probably the only possible approach that can fully guarantee its persistency in the long run. Given the social relevance and often limited profitability, cultural facilities provided by private sectors are generally assumed to be collectively relevant and are often supported by public institutions or non-profit foundations. Nevertheless, while on the one hand this sector is crucial for the essential cultural life of city, on the other it remains particularly exposed to possible crises. As it is already well known, the spread of COVID-19 has impacted and shocked the whole world and the economy of all countries. The need to protect public health with social distancing measures, the introduction of limits on particular activities, especially those of leisure and entertainment, as well as the frequent total or soft lockdowns corresponding in diffused social and economic downturn. In particular, the pandemic has shown the inherent fragility of the cultural and creative sector. The economic activities grounded on venue-based events such as performing arts, live music, cinema, and museum are seriously hit by social distancing measures. Moreover, due to the fact that these activities are considered not to be essential, they are more easily sacrificed by public institutions. As it is now evident, after some consecutive months of restriction, the whole system is not anymore able to support its complex network. To give some example, the income from live music events is now close to zero. Many independent non-profit cultural spaces like small art galleries and laboratories, workshops or cultural clubs, theaters and cinema, to name a few, are closing down. The crisis is not hitting only the creative and cultural sectors, by the way. Due to certain hardly changeable trends, at least in the short term, the destiny of many historical settlements and cities general, which are the natural incubators of urban heritage and culture, is now under threat. Evident phenomenon as mass decrease in tourism, empty city center, especially because of the increase of smart working measures and less face-to-face shopping, are all phenomena of this kind. Therefore, and inevitably, this is not only an economic crisis that is hitting the cultural and the creative sector, but a deeper one that will probably show its enduring effect in urban context for a very long time. In short, both cultural activities and cities are experiencing a deep crisis. However, as certain new attitudes and interests in contemporary public debates demonstrate, this is not merely a time of crisis, but potentially also the right time to rethink and restructure certain unsustainable or problematic post-COVID trends, for instance, the almost mono-economy of over-touristified city. Moreover, this seems also to be the right time to discuss how important can be the contribution of cultural and creative activities in reinvigorating the life of historical city centre and generate positive urban regeneration processes both from an economic and social perspective. After this thematic overview, we now want to move to the perspective of private cultural actors. So we want to provide certain emerging current trends and issues in the sector. Well, it is important to say that together the perspectives of private actors, we conducted a qualitative survey to some relevant companies. The selection of actors was based mainly on three factors. Firstly, their long-standing sectoral experience. Secondly, their affinity in terms of scope and interest with the ROCK project. Thirdly, the diversity of their core services and activities so that a wider range of perspectives could have been represented. In fact, the selected actors are active in the following sectors: real estate and construction, in particular in the valorization of heritage buildings, museum management and services, publishing, cultural events organization and management, marketing and communication strategies, and ticketing. All surveys were conducted between September 25th and October 17th this year, 2020. The first question raised to actors concerned the impact of COVID-19 on their activities and services. The answers were of two kinds, mainly. Firstly, they say that COVID-19 has generated an online turn of many activities and services provided by the companies. This meant, for example, a consistent reduction of face-to-face meetings and the digitalization of many activities, included the ones of dissemination and promotion. On the other hand, actors emphasize the great economic impact of the pandemics on their main assets and activities. Besides the enormous reduction on revenues, in certain cases between 75 and 80%, companies needed to totally review their existing plans and strategy. This meant, for example, the postponement of ongoing projects and rescheduling and cancellation of many events. The second question we raised to the actors concerned their reaction to the challenges deriving from COVID-19. One reaction concerned the stipulation of internal strategies to deal with the creation of safer working conditions. This meant, for example, that new company protocols were introduced to reduce contact risk interaction. Other common measures were more about job flexibility or remote working and change of working and services times. But besides dealing with health issues, and in order to remain competitive, companies had also to reinvent some of their key activities and specific market analysis to monitor changes in the sector where needed. Also, most of the actors declared that they started to invest consistently in technological development and marketing activities for the intensification of online communication and services restructuring. Then, another important reaction was the attempt to reduce internal cost. In certain cases, this was possible thanks to policy of personnel restructuring and salary reduction, as well as the renegotiation of contracts with suppliers and owners. Lastly, as declared, for instance, by one of the interview actors, the spread of the pandemic has also increased new awareness in the sectors towards a more excellent products and services. So now we move to the third question, which is about the main innovation introduced by the actors. Well, all the interviewed companies had to innovate themselves, both internally and externally. Some necessary innovation concern their working environment. For example, new technological services have been introduced to guarantee high-quality standards for remote working and virtual meeting rooms. But then, other important innovation regard the specific activities. In the case of museum management and services, many traditional services were combined with the digital ones. Examples are the implementation of virtual tours and interactive platform. the development of online sales channels, and also the introduction of digital services for museum protection and management. But interesting innovations were introduced in the case of bookshop too. Services like web offer and home delivery were established. Moreover, very interesting exploration now to integrate the physical and the digital space of bookshops have been experimented. While in the case of events, organization and management, the main innovation concerned the new access and security protocols and strategies, with the introduction of relatively new elements such as time slot for entrances and reservation, but also tools for temperature measurement of visitors. After understanding the main innovation introduced in the sector, we asked the actors to think about the impact of these changes on their future activities and services. Well, in regards to future changes in their activities, all the interview actors addressed the importance of digital innovation in the provision of services and in their ordinary activities. They believe indeed that the ongoing drastic digital and online turn will be irreversible and will consistently restructure and influence future investment plans and strategies. But only one company points out the possibility of a kind of rubber band effect that potentially could slow down the speed of innovation process and bring the sector back to the previous situation. Then, beside the issue of technological transformation, another interesting point that emerged from the analysis is the necessity to redistribute tourist flow or visitors flow more in general in order to reduce the risk of overcrowding. Although only one actor clearly addressed this issue, the need to control, redistribute, and plan visitor flow is coherent with some previously mentioned new actions such as ticketing reservation and visitor slots. So this is an important issue. Finally, we asked the actors to think about the main challenges that must be overcome to enable cultural-led urban heritage regeneration. As regards cultural services in general, all the actors more or less underscored the need to advance an innovative, more contemporary and wider concept of art and culture capable of going beyond an old and generally more passive view. This means, for instance, favoring the production of cultural activities by insisting on a more integrated relationship between heritage context and creativity. Also, they express the need to modernize museum experiences, or more in general, the experience of heritage context, through even more technological innovation and new digital services. All this with the main scope to involve and include always more people and strengthen the role of culture and heritage in society. Another relevant aspect pointed out by the actors regard the need to better integrate the diverse activities of the cultural and creative sectors by creating stronger ties between specific sectoral services, for instance, hospitality, museum, and gastronomy. In other words, they express the need to strengthen a more integrated chain of services so that the current perceived fragmentation can be overcome. From a more political and institutional perspective, the actors address different aspects. First of all, they think that the cultural sector should be recognized as a real economic driving force. Secondly, they express the need to include and facilitate the private sector in general and more consistently in the production of culture and the management of urban heritage. Thirdly, and more from an administrative perspective, they suggest that in case of future crisis, it would be preferable to help companies directly to maintain their business alive and therefore also all job positions. But also, they suggest that to help and incentivize the cultural system, it could be a valid idea, for instance, to introduce a system of tax deduction for cultural expenses. Finally, and from a more strategical perspective, two main suggestions emerge. Firstly, the necessity to better regulate and discipline the integrated valorization of urban heritage at the legislative level. Secondly, they need to work on a long-term vision for the promotion and activation of minor and less known heritage centers by spreading more awareness within the private sectors, incentivizing integrated regeneration processes, and investing in a more sustainable and qualitative form of tourism. So after presenting and discussing the emergent trends in the field, so the result of our survey, it's time to go to the final points, so the conclusion, and try to see which are the main implications and try to answer how post-COVID urban regeneration can use culture to rethink itself. Well, how it was imaginable, the cultural sector is working very hard to reinvent itself and overcome the many challenges derived by the contemporary pandemic. Nevertheless, the level of uncertainty of current trends connected to possible and even prolonged soft or hard lockdown measures, as well as the dynamic of the virus, and eventually the discovery of a vaccine, is a factor that must be taken into serious consideration when discussing future scenarios of urban heritage regeneration. At the same time, months of crisis and trial and error processes of innovation can already show certain possible economic and political tendency and direction. Therefore, considering the perspective of cultural actors and the ongoing global trends and challenges experienced by cities, now we try to propose certain possible implications and tips on how to trigger a positive role of culture in the post-COVID period for the regeneration of urban heritage. So let's start from a point that I think is quite visible and clear and also quite inevitable. This first point concerns the great digitalization and virtualization of the entire sector. We don't know if this is good or bad, of course. Certainly, all these open up scenarios that can be radically in contrast with the need to regenerate physical, concrete, material, real places. The second point is a systemic opportunity. The crisis in the touristic sector, as a consequence of the pandemic, leaves a huge empty space in cultural and artistically relevant cities. This space now can become an opportunity to rethink some pre-COVID models, also negative or perceived as negative models, but also an opportunity to rethink the character of the whole service offered. To give an example, cities like Venice and Barcelona now have the opportunity to really reorganize their cultural offer, so also their image. Another important implication may concern also the greater awareness of citizens. Indeed, after the lockdown experience, it is now clear, I think, the importance of living in contexts that can offer higher quality in their proximity spaces. This can be an important opportunity for the whole cultural sectors, which can certainly conquer some more space and try to improve the life of citizens. Another issue concerns the already existing tendency to discover and promote smaller centers that are less known, let's say. Social distancing measures and the digitalization of many activities, as well as the lower cost, can turn some marginal heritage contexts more attractive for new investments. A very good example is the initiative of the association La Rivoluzione delle Seppie, which brought a group of British students to live and study remotely in a small Calabrian village, which was at risk of depopulation, and actually it is still at risk of depopulation. So you can see there is some space to create something in marginal context. Finally, I think there is a need to encourage artistic and cultural production in general, especially in unusual contexts. This means increasing the possibility to experiment new uses and activities in urban context, but also rethink and work on certain technical issues such as the strict definition of land use classes. From this perspective, urban planning can do a lot to simplify some regulatory aspects so as to favor more entrepreneurship and experimentation. However, going to the conclusion, any discourse can remain superficial if, as seemed to be happening during the second recent wave of COVID-19, we don't start thinking about the creative and cultural sector, especially performing arts, in a more responsible way. Indeed, the whole sector has already been suffering this crisis for months, and it may no longer be enough to find the resources to help workers and companies economically. Given the great current uncertainty, I believe it is now the time to start thinking about how to live, work, and operate under and with the threat of the virus. In other words, instead of lockdown measure, certain conditions under which the whole sector can continue to work and express itself must be guaranteed and introduced by the state. We have to do everything we can, and as soon as possible, to find new solutions that will enable this whole sector to operate. This must be the first objective. Then the second objective will be to think on how to bring the cultural sector at the center of a wider reflection on urban regeneration. But first, it is now time to find workable ways to let the workers of this sector in a position to create and invent. Thank you.